This is Todd McCarthy. I'm film critic for Variety.
I'm David Thomson. I'm the author of the Biographical Dictionary of Film.
This is John Powers. I'm film critic for Vogue.
Well, I heard no advance word on the film at all. There was no buzz. There was no real heightened expectation. No one had really seen the film, and I saw it in an early screening. People I perceived as just another Joel Silver action sci-fi film with a little bit of an extra. You didn't know what to expect from the Wachowski brothers after Bound. I had mixed feelings about Bound, but they obviously were very stylish and they were very savvy. But mainly I remember that film for its sexiness, so I didn't think that was going to translate over into this film.
Yeah, I went to it with a lot of dread. I had really hated Bound, which had struck me as being a movie made for Hollywood agents, in both its stylishness and its heartlessness. And I thought it was, empty-headed and exploitative and not much fun. But I had heard from a friend who had seen it, because I actually saw it in a theater. I didn't see it at the press screening, that it was good and that I should definitely go. So I went the first day. And, the people around me were blown away. And, the thought I remember having when I watched the film, which was incomparably better and more ambitious than Bound, was also that this had already shifted the terrain somehow. And I remember saying to my wife, oh, actually, this will change the reception of Star Wars. The Star Wars mythology of those earlier films seemed like an earlier generation's mythology, and this one seemed like the new generation's mythology. So I was really curious about what would come of that. As a viewer, my heart kind of sank at thinking I was going to see another film like lots of other films, beginning with sort of shootout sequence.
There's also that very strong sense of the beauty in film noir straight away.
Yeah.
Very German opening almost, I think.
And that work with the flashlights, it instantly reminded me of some great work Conrad Hall did a few years ago, where everything was lit by flashlight. What was the name of that film? It was a mystery thriller film. I just can't think of it, but it looked just like that.
Yeah. Two worlds here, the sort of classic old-style city cop and these zombie-like figures. It's a very good signal of the way different genres are drawn together in this whole series, I think.
And we haven't really seen them yet, but right at the outset, the way the credits are done, and the way the credits are done through the whole series is very, very striking and quite cool. And then that one shot reminds you of kind of the 2001
Yes, and when Carrie
Stargate sequence.
Yes, when she leaps here, you suddenly realize, oh, this is going to be yet a third genre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Being brought in.
Yeah. She also, to me, looks very like Maria Casares in the Cocteau films. There's that allusion too, I think.
Yes, with the fetish outfit.
Absolutely.
Which is crucial, I think, to the film.
There's so much running in all the films, and I must say the running is done in a very striking way. Certainly Hugo Weaving and Carrie-Anne Moss do it, and you wonder how worked out that was. But just the style of running is quite amusing and fun to watch all the time.
Yeah.
There's, of course, Vertigo sequence.
Absolutely. Do you think there's a sort of slowing of the pacing to make the running look more beautiful?
Would be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Strangely old-fashioned weapons, too. Another thing in this film is that there's a lot of intense futuristic things, but many of the weapons are very old-fashioned.
That's right. And it does bring to mind the enormous number of elements coming into the fusion of creating this very intriguing world.
Yeah. But there's an interesting little query comes to my mind there. If you can fly, why do you need to run?
Right. Well, right off the bat, in the first 5 minutes, you are thrown off because you don't know what's possible and what isn't possible.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you actually are seeing various noir genre. Carrie-Anne Moss just did the, I think, sort of trademark John Woo flying through and the way she holds the guns. You actually feel the Hong Kong presence really deeply already.
What's the first film you can remember where guys wear dark glasses at night?
I'm not sure. I think the first person I ever saw do it was Jack Nicholson.
But were there possibly characters in Godard's films as well as gangster films? I think that's kind of what I remember.
Yeah.
And now here you have this, the shot of Keanu, who is, strangely ageless.
Conjures up all sorts of resonances.
Yes. Yeah. And it raises that interesting question of why everybody always speaks so cryptically in such things, rather than just saying someone's about to knock on your door.
Yeah. And are we in a culture where we can expect Neo and the audience both to know Alice in Wonderland? Or is this a private aside for three guys sitting in a room like us?
And something that's very smart here that we later learn in the film is that, of course, that Neo, being a computer geek, in fact, is like perfect for a lot of the audience of the film, who spend a lot of their time on the computer. To somehow transform that person into the one is a really interesting.
Very much so. I mean, I thought of that immediately when I saw this. It's a perfect, late '90s slacker character who's very into computers, and of course, this looks like it could be the apartment next door to the one in Darren Aronofsky's film Pi.
Yes, it does.
It's also called film studies, and for the teenage audience of today, I think one of the great appeals of film is this drug-like dream reality fusion. And this is one of the films that gets it better than anything, I think.
I think it's actually one of the first films that also uses a tattoo as a plot point. Actually, one of the smart things about the series is the way it takes almost all the stuff that was out in the zeitgeist and finds some way to use it and actually weave it into the fabric of the film, and not just have it seem like some artificially contrived attempt to be cool.
Yeah. But another thing about that zeitgeist is that while we're clearly in some sort of future, the living standards and the sort of standards of decor seem to have become terribly tatty and grungy. And I think that's very much the way a lot of people feel, that we're being drawn into the future, but our living standards are secretly declining all the time.
Which then I think, I had sort of hints of, clearly Philip K. Dick is one of the influences on this. And then you think of Blade Runner, which is some of the same ideas.
And something has happened to language in this world, too. People talk not in the way they do now. I hope it's a way they will never talk, but it's a movie-like way of talking, based on enigma almost.
And with a kind of incantatory use of the name Neo over and over again. It's not just setting it up as so that people remember it. They actually are using it because that's the fact that he's Neo, the One, is a part of magical feature of the film.
Totally.
Yes.
And there's a way in which all this dialogue could be sung, I think. It's nearly operatic.
That might give someone an idea.
Well, there we are. We're generous. The Matrix cycle.
It'll be staged by the Cirque du Soleil people.
Yeah, you could see it all, can't you?
Yes. They'll be building a theater in Vegas for it.
That's right.
Next week.
Yeah, even that last sequence, like when you see a film by Wong Kar-wai, for instance, you will actually think, that there's some of the same kind of visual idea going on there with it doesn't look the same, but the relation of music and sound, it's not natural.
Yeah.
It's clearly heightened in a way.
Yeah.
You're right. It seems really set very much in the present day in so many ways, in terms of both the subculture of the kind of grungy rock club now, and very, very corporate identity, black suit and tie, and then the little wires for their headsets.
And, of course, primary colors do not seem to exist anymore.
No.
Yes.
Blood is almost the only primary color in this film we will see.
Here's where you're getting one of the early linkages of nasty corporate culture with Matrix culture.
Yeah.
I think probably "have a nice day" as a line of dialogue in films internationally means that something terrible is about to happen.
That is a FedEx envelope, isn't it, too? I love the way he turned there, and the way that sort of gave access to an inner world. I think the Wachowskis are very good at that sort of simple, strong movement in actors.
It's interesting how quickly in the series the strength of Hugo Weaving's face as a kind of one of the dominant features of the film is established. He actually just has a face that somehow becomes iconic very quickly.
Yes, it was one of the great casting strokes in this series, I think, the casting of Hugo Weaving. Yeah. And his vocal deliveries as well. They're just so insinuating. They're marvelous. We'll listen as we go along.
As the series progresses, in some ways he almost becomes the strongest character because he becomes the most vivid, particularly once there are 1,000 of him.
And again, going back to speech, he speaks in a more sophisticated way. And yet in theory, he's the emblem of a world where humanity has been drained away. But he's got the most interesting speaking style.
Yes. And if you go back pre-Matrix to Keanu Reeves' public image and his critical reputation and so on, he, despite the fact that he'd been in many films, he was sort of a blank. I mean, he'd been in a lot of bad films and never really convinced anyone he was a particularly good actor. And yet you had a kind of I had an open feeling toward him that I was willing to still be brought in and engage with him. So he ends up being effective, even though, and this is no doubt his iconic role now. I mean, this is probably the role he'll be most remembered for.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that because Bertolucci had made him the Buddha, and you realize that that although that didn't work, it wasn't completely wrong, because there's something about it's also partly a sort of biracial thing with him that gives him, he has a sweet face, but it's also a slightly different face.
Yes.
And clearly the multiracial thing enters in hugely into the film later on. But he is destined to be the chosen one.
And he's ageless too,
Yeah,
don't you think?
he is ageless.
Absolutely.
It's very hard to sort of tell what age he is in this film. I think anyone guessing would guess it younger than he really was when he made the film.
Yeah.
Well, you see him as an employee here, and you can easily think that he's just been out of school for
That's right.
a few years. He
Yeah.
could still be in his late 20s or whatever, yeah.
And he's also the prettiest person in the film. He's actually, it's one of the interesting things is to have the leading man be prettier than the leading lady in a way, because it actually allows him once again a slight kind of gender blur, just in his prettiness. That he's weaker in some ways than the Carrie-Anne Moss character, who's actually made more masculine.
Yeah.
Especially at the beginning of the film, all of which works for the film.
Yeah. These angled claustrophobic compositions, again, they're very good at it, I think.
Yeah, superbly set up.
Yeah.
Is irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the smart things is the way that with the names like Neo and Morpheus, that because they could potentially be hacker names, that the mythic quality of the story only gradually reveals itself.
Yeah.
So that because when you first hear Morpheus, you think, oh my God, is it one of the is it going to be some sort of goofy thing? And then you think, oh well, he could just be a hacker. In which case, it anchors it in the world, and then the thing becomes mythic, rather than instantly being mythic.
But don't you here also feel the Wachowskis almost falling in love with Hugo Weaving?
Oh yeah.
And the audience, I think. He's irresistible. I think as the film goes on, one of the things I'd say is that Weaving never really is allowed to go deeper. And you feel that there ought to be more depth to this character.
He multiplies but doesn't go deeper.
Yes,
Yeah.
But I think by definition he couldn't go deeper.
No.
Well,
Yeah.
I suppose you're right, but I think that it's something that, he's almost the most interesting human being in the film. That's the problem I have.
He has the best dialogue.
Yeah.
And he delivers it the best. But as an emanation of in a way, he's got that problem.
Yes. But I wonder if the plot couldn't have worked it around to something where he might have been a Neo.
Oh, no, here we go.
Oh,
This
there we
himself.
go.
Effects
Yeah.
realm.
Now that's very frightening.
Yes.
It's from Alien. It's
Yes.
from, what else can we think of?
Was it Parasite? I think.
Yeah.
Well, also, one doesn't know where one is left here. If
He doesn't know.
This is a dream,
Exactly.
Or what? So it deepens the mystery
It deepens the
immediately.
mystery. Yeah, and there's it's kind of that, that Cronenberg-y sense of the violation of the body.
Oh, totally.
Even the colors there,
Yeah.
had that kind of Cronenberg feel a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I think probably very few films I've seen have actually set up different levels of reality more skillfully than this. So it actually seems enigmatic, and it gradually dawns on you. And the effects aren't used too cheaply, and you actually at this point in the film really are wondering.
Well,
where you
already
are.
by this time you've been completely captured by the brilliance and seamlessness of all the effects,
Yes.
the running effects and so on, plus that bit of special effects.
Yeah.
And so you feel you're in excellent hands, and that you're in the hands of filmmakers that know exactly what they're doing and how to achieve what they intend to do.
Yeah.
Yes. And by here the world seems coherent, even though you can't make sense of it completely.
Yeah. And also there's this sense all the time that if you've got just a close-up of someone, these people know exactly how to frame a face
Yes.
with dark and light to get the maximum human quality out of it.
But one thing that's a little curious is that the first time that Neo hears from Morpheus over the phone, he says, well, we've been looking for you. Now, does that mean he really couldn't find him? Or did he chose that moment when Hugo Weaving and the guys were just about to come in, which he then says that he can observe? He's an omniscient figure who can observe the moment that Hugo Weaving and his guys come in. I'm not even still sure to this moment that I can figure that part out.
Yeah.
It plays games with its own rules, there's no doubt.
Now, that's an old car. That's a 60s car.
Yes.
So it's really mixing up old noir, done in color, but with a very, very extreme degree of control over the colors and so on.
And yet, this is a machine such as no one has yet imagined.
Yes. And then you have the weird way in which the dialogue is sometimes I can't tell whether it's actively rotten or deliberately stylized. So when the woman says it's our way or the highway, yes, you can't tell, was that deliberate?
Also, I guess you can't ignore the fact, too, that this is one of several films where Keanu's own big scar on his belly is prominently displayed. It's always in the Buddha film.
Yeah.
And then in this film, actually, they do something to his belly right here.
Yep.
First strong color in the film?
Yes.
Yeah, except less prominently with the character's lips and the rear
Yes.
The lips
tires.
and the rear lights, the
rear lights.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't know where we are either. We know now where the film is shot.
Now look at that. I mean, the way the water goes down the wall, just staggering.
Extraordinary. But we don't know what city we're in. It's the anonymous big city.
It's the city.
And with early 20th century architecture plus
and the
most
stairwell.
modern
I mean, that's out of Fritz Lang. It's very classical. And he lives in the 18th century or some vague version of it.
Distant echoes of the final part of 2001 with the decor.
Very much.
The tattered.
And this is the real Joseph Campbell Hero with 1,000 Faces stuff, where you meet the mentor, who at the same time actually, while being a mentor, slightly is in awe of you at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good description of Keanu Reeves. The background of thunder here, I think, is beautifully done.
Yes.
See, if you were to read this dialogue on the page, and much of it, it would seem very borderline pretentious and almost risible.
Yeah.
And we've heard it all before, and yet it's the gravity and the precision, I think, with which the atmosphere and the line readings are done that make it palatable.
Yeah, and the way these huge close-ups hold the widescreen with it and everything.
Well, the precision of delivery, there's no ums and hesitations. It's all very, very calculated and very precisely spoken, especially by Fishburne and Hugo Weaving.
Yeah, and Fishburne actually, does have a weight and gravitas to him, which allows him to say, some awfully silly things, throughout the course of the film.
Just like Dorothy, she had to learn for herself.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're back to the red thing again.
Yeah.
Remember.
One of the things I think I admired here is the rather unusual willingness to be slightly slow and pretentious in some of these sequences. Because I think a lot of filmmakers are afraid of that, and maybe in some of the later films they actually do get pretentious, but here they're willing to court that, which I think is actually a surprising thing in a Hollywood film.
Well, that's the key scene there where he takes the red pill, of course, because he's willing to enter in, and then that, as an audience too, I mean, how can you resist? All right, we have to go ahead now and swallow this, or explore this new mythological science fiction universe. But I think part of my original resistance to the whole film is that I'm often reluctant to confront yet one more giant mythological construct, because we've got so many of those in life that we have to deal with from our earliest age. We have to learn biblical references, Greek mythology, Roman, Wagner, whatever. It just goes on and on. How many, and then Lord of the Rings, how many of those constructs do you really want to, or are you prepared to explore to the point where you can really understand them all and be masters of them? And I personally kind of resist that. I mean, is this really going to be worth devoting hours to figuring out what the various layers here are and going back to the source and so on? So, of course, you can't resist the way it's put there, but still, I also often have a problem with that, because is it really going to be worth it? How many of these alternate mythologies can one really confront and get a handle on?
Yeah. Let me say something here that I think is relevant. I have a teenage son, and I saw this with him together, and I remember that scene because I turned to him and said, isn't this a little bit gobbledygooky? And he really turned on me and said, shut up, this is good stuff. And I do think there's something here that is absolutely of the modern teenage mind. And, we're not the people this film was made for.
Well, it was clear to me, too. My objection originally was that it was full of the kind of undergraduate philosophizing that one always goes through at a certain age.
Yeah.
But frankly, at my point, I'm reluctant to tackle it.
You're still reluctant, yeah.
Yes. But that's really where it's at. It's like the pseudo, what I view now as kind of pseudo-profundity, which at a certain moment can look almost profound.
Well, I think you put your finger on something very important.
And you can imagine being 18 or 19 and staying up all night long arguing and debating the various aspects of it and what's really going on in this, and especially after just the first film, to speculate about what the entire thing is going to be like.
Yeah.
Oh.
Now.
Going through the looking glass, we have the birth sequence, and this is not a film that is trying to hide the fact that it's mythic.
No, but to begin to piece together the elements and wonder how far they're going to go with certain elements is the mystery.
Yes.
But also in a visceral level. I mean, visually, visually, the film is so striking that you go along for the ride, even if you're not comprehending it all.
And even if a lot of these things you think you've seen in other films of this kind, there's a lot of Alien in this sequence particularly, it's still got a fresh take on it, I think.
And watching some of the earlier parts, having seen the later two films, you also realize what in some of the later films which when it doesn't work so well, what really is portentous, and whereas here it actually is kind of alive and fresh, and it really does offer more levels of time and reality than you can shake a stick at. I think.
Very routine music, I think. For an epic franchise like this, I don't think The Matrix has distinguished music.
No, it has some heavy rock elements, especially in this film. But the actual symphonic score, it's true, is surprisingly conventional.
Yeah.
It's the most conventional aspect of the film, I think.
Yeah.
But the magpie quality of the film is one of the most striking.
It is.
Yes.
No, and remember that they were working on this script well before Bound for 5 or 7 years, something like that. And I had the feeling that as I just watched it for the first time and reading my original review, that they kept adding on probably over those years, level after level after level after level of reference and thing that they could throw in, which you could say on the one hand adds to the richness, but also it gives one a lot of things to reference.
The way he sat up there, that's the kind of thing Reeves does wonderfully.
Yes.
It sounds very simple, very ordinary, but he does it really with such ease and beauty.
Again, I don't know. Seeing this all just on the page with no visuals at all, I can't.
But even watching it a little bit, you think Morpheus is a slightly irritating character in his inability to answer a straight question.
Yeah.
No doubt the Nebuchadnezzar reference is filled with meaning to the filmmakers. I'm not sure that it carries a lot of weight for me.
Now, that was the first tip-off there about a date, wasn't it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So 2069, am I correct?
And she's in her Flashdance outfit there.
Interesting that Joe Pantoliano is allowed to play exactly the way he always does, which I have nothing against. I love it. But he's a totally hip street rat straight away. He isn't affected by this kind of semi-drugged quality at all.
No, the idea that Joe Pantoliano-ness is eternal.
Yes.
Somehow.
At the moment, of course, this looks like a fashion shoot, which raises the question, how much of the success of The Matrix in the first place was due to its fashion sense? It has an unbelievable fashion sense.
Oh, yeah, tremendously great.
Yeah.
Because it actually is interesting that a film like this, more than anything, has to be cool. And in fact, fashion sense is part of something that would make a movie cool.
Well, it's a very simple but very crucial decisions about the style of sunglasses, the mostly black wardrobe, occasionally accentuated like this with the green tie.
And those long coats, which are extremely cool, as opposed to like the businessman's or the dark suit where my Hugo weaving.
Yeah.
Although
The
even
FBI.
those had a coolness.
Oh,
they
they
were
do, yes.
resonating off of Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, they
and
do,
so on,
yeah, of course.
The
No,
black suit.
no,
and white
it's the
tie,
Reservoir
white shirt.
Dogs suit flipped.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know when the long coats came in cinema, but if I remember them first in a way from I think the Sergio Leone
Yes, that's what I
films.
think they are. Yeah.
I don't really
Yeah.
remember them much before that.
Yeah.
Dusters. Yeah.
Yes.
And then and I know they certainly went through John Woo.
Yeah.
It's,
Right.
And then you're always interested, in the way that, where would filmmakers get it? For example, would they discover it in one person and then trace it back? And so they might actually know John Woo before they know Sergio Leone, and learn it that way. Yeah. But like the green tie is very good there.
United in celebration.
I think here's a place where where we're starting to get the backstory of the universe, and I remember seeing it at the time, thinking, "Oh, this is a little talky."
Yeah, I actually began getting a little bit bored during
Yeah.
this stretch. I thought it was really bogging down after the very, very striking opening sequences.
The whole series is very thin on what terrible set of processes it is that has overtaken the world.
Yes.
And in part, I think that's because for the teenage audience, it's very awkward to start getting into real things that they're actually living through and suffering from and might take action about. I mean, although it's a film about the resistance in many ways, this is a very non-political film. Well, because you've got to fight this system, but there is no sense that mistakes were made in human social history, economic history, that you might go back and avert. I mean, it's very imprecise what terrible thing has overtaken this world, what the Matrix is, in fact, overlying everything.
Well, and I think that kind of non-political stance is almost required in a large franchise picture. I mean, you don't. It's very difficult to get into that kind of terrain. I think there are very few pictures one could cite.
Well, that's certainly
although there might be, let's say,
product placement.
insurrectionist
Yeah.
tendencies or rebellious tendencies in certain ways, but not overtly political. It'd be very rare to find that.
It
Certain
would
films
be.
have very simple structures. I mean, if you just even take like Kevin Costner's film, The Postman. I mean, something happened,
Yeah.
and then you jump to a point in the future where it's clearly laid out what's taken place.
But
This
I
is
think-
less precise.
Yeah, but I mean, we were talking earlier off camera about Jean-Luc Godard. Godard, I think, would say you've got to address what went wrong. And indeed, in many ways, that's what his work has tried to do over the decades. Because if you don't do that, then you're simply making something that diverts you from the problem. And it's an absolute illusion that you're really as concerned with the problem as Morpheus says, pretends to be.
Yes.
And that might lead to my own resistance to entering into these freshly born mythological constructs, because I often wonder, what's the use of it? What's the point of one more construct like this when we have so many? And some of them have very strong cultural relevance based on when they were formed, religiously or politically. But just to invent one out of many pieces of cloth, such as this, you wonder what the point is, other than to just divert and to take you on a kind of a mind trip.
Yeah.
Along with the suggestion, that would be more complicated and probably doesn't really work for a film of this kind, that maybe there's something that's been created in this world that is the fault of Morpheus and Neo. The idea that they have made some choice along the way, which is the intellectually more complicated argument.
Yeah.
That they inherit this world, which therefore and of course that fits the teenage mind perfectly.
Exactly.
But, I
Yeah.
I remember feeling that way when I was a kid.
Grievance without responsibility.
Yes, well, and in
Yes.
fact, you do feel that you were thrown into this world.
Yeah.
Yes,
Of course.
Yeah.
I do think that that there's a little bit of this sort of philosophical, historical guff in the film that actually slows it down, and like Todd, I remember getting a little bored. At
Yeah,
this point.
I was really disengaging from the film during this stretch here, the first time through. But it also raises what are the actual religious implications of because you have this sort of thing. Then plus, of course, very the weighty name of Zion.
Yes.
You bet.
For the holdouts, the final holdouts, and the only hope of humanity. But how far does that sort of thing go? I'm still not sure.
And once again, you have the thing that is so huge throughout the films, which is, and this is part of the film's cool, but it's probably, if there's an implicit politics to the film, it has to do with multicultural things. Basically, it's the white guys in suits versus the people who are of many different races and colors and don't seem to notice that they're of many different races and colors.
Right.
Well, which also somewhat represents an older generation, younger generation split in contemporary times.
It does.
I think resonates greatly with maybe the audience split for the film as well.
I don't know if that character is supposed to be as creepy as he strikes me. I keep thinking I might meet him at an airport proselytizing.
Yes, you'd back away, wouldn't you?
It's kind of like a younger Tom Cruise character.
Yes, and one can't fail to be struck that Keanu Reeves is a very good-looking man. That it's because when you put him in that kind of outfit, most people don't look good in that.
No.
And he does look great.
And he actually does amazement and shock time and time again very well.
Yes, he does. And he never, I don't mean this nastily, he never seems all that smart. Which I think audiences in general don't identify with characters who seem too smart.
Show me.
Now there's a get out for a great deal of the film.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But I think this actually is one of the great sequences. In fact, this stretch where Neo is learning the rules here. You get the same thing, in that remake of Zorro. It's where the person's learning how to become the person that they're capable of being. I think this kind of thing, the Karate Kid.
Oh yeah,
has the same
works.
It works. This is like throughout the history of time.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah,
now we see we're in another realm.
Yes.
With some martial arts. But to move, it's also very striking visually to move from this very grungy kind of submarine look to this fantastically formalized Japanese setting.
And this really was, I think, the first Hollywood film to do this stuff right in a way that made it seem fresh and not just recycling old Hong Kong stars.
Well, other than very mundane kind of Steven Seagal sorts of things, what other predecessors were there to this kind of Hong Kong-derived martial arts in Hollywood films?
I think probably a couple of the Jet Li films might have existed by then. Jackie Chan had done. I think they weren't really. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the exact date of those Shanghai movies and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember seeing this and thinking that Quentin Tarantino was probably losing his mind at the fact that people were doing it before he did and doing it in a cool way.
Yeah.
That maybe he was going to. It actually worked out for him. I do think the watching sequence of stuff is one of the most boring things in the world.
What other people watching?
Other people watching. I'm perfectly content simply to watch it myself. I think it's great that they were able to get Keanu Reeves' trademark line into the film.
It's interesting too that for all the very stylized noir type lighting like this, once they get out in daylight, the film has a great feeling for daylight. It's very white and chilly, but there's a winter light quality to it.
Yes.
It's very attractive.
Cast our doubts aside.
But it's interesting, like the way that they follow the obligatory rituals of all of these things. So he has to fail here because it has to be exciting when he succeeds.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just a while ago, he said something like, "Don't think it, know it."
Yes.
And now your mind makes it real. You could write a fascinating philosophical book on how those two principles don't quite mesh. What do we feel about the sort of love or sentimental relationship between these two? I mean, it's achingly there in the compositions and in the way she moves, but to me they still feel more like brother and sister, almost, or splits of one person,
No, they do, and he's, Keanu is an oddly asexual actor. I think there is that kind of, slightly androgynous quality to him. He doesn't convey the heat.
Nothing. No.
No, and later on, projecting ahead, you feel it more coming from her than from him. Certainly, he's a almost like a cipher. You can project one's feelings into him, but you don't really feel much coming out of him.
Yeah.
But this is quite interesting too. Just the the design of it, the black and white
Oh, yeah.
costumes of everyone else,
Yes.
all the extras coming around.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's this. I mean, this is a very skill. I remember loving this the first time I saw it. You know, when you all of a sudden you get the red, it's you know she's trouble. And what's interesting about this is the way at the time it seemed really thrilling, and one of the problems for the endurance of the film is that 8,500 TV commercials
Have done it.
have done it now, so that over time, what seems so arresting now seems familiar, even though at the time I remember the audience that I saw it with gasping when they saw it.
I think this is true of the whole film.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly the first one.
Yeah.
That in, 1999, it was in so many ways breathtaking.
Yeah.
And now it's déjà vu, and as you well know from this series, that déjà vu is a warning sign of the Matrix comic.
Yes.
Sooner or later.
The old "we got trouble" phone call.
No, so all this during this the sequences during this long middle stretch of the picture, the ones that are set, as you say, outside, the one of course in the martial arts room and so on, are so much more striking that pull you in than these scenes.
They are. It's
This is just sort of you could run these. They're almost, although very nicely done, they're very generic and don't really have the impact.
and it's funny when you actually get to that world. You can already feel. I mean, I would have thought after seeing the first film that they would play this world down, because it's the part of the film that's deader. Yet, in fact, when they expand it later, it's startling.
I mean, it almost became to me like a borderline grunge version of Star Trek or something, where they're just flying around, going to a new world and so on, with rules that you aren't quite sure about.
Because if you actually strip down this particular thing, there's a purity to the storyline, and that whenever they get away from that storyline to just sort of routine adventures, it's a less good film. I mean, Lawrence Fishburne should always be wearing those sunglasses where you can see Neo's face. Somehow it's more potent.
And also, those scenes in a more real world are so intriguing at the level of, say, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, yeah.
You're just never quite sure which person you're looking at is going to be a real person or a robot or whatever.
Yes, it was in that John Carpenter film. Was it a John Carpenter film about when, like you put on these glasses, you could see like the magazine covers, and all the magazine covers said "conform."
Yeah.
Yes, it's the. It was like a Rowdy Piper or something.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Neo.
No, it's really as to do too that when things happen in an artificial context like this, where everything is special effects, anything can happen, but then it has less meaning and less impact. Whereas if you're in the real, so-called real world of the exteriors or one simple set, then everything takes on a much more magnified impact.
Yeah.
Although it should be said that the raining numbers, is as a sort of visual thing is
pretty.
Oh, it's superb.
pretty and brilliantly used.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the trailer for the second film, and when that stuff was doing it, and there actually was a gasp of thrill from the audience because of just seeing those green things going down. Yeah.
Very exciting. Yeah.
Very exciting.
I know what you're thinking.
There's certain hair issues, I think, also in the future that that the film doesn't completely address.
Well, Keanu is virtually always perfectly shaven.
Yes.
God knows how.
Yeah.
His hair length varies, but the bald look is very.
Well, do you think
very
Keanu's beard grows? I'm not sure that it does.
No.
I think it's fixed forever. Perfect.
No, I once saw him in an airport, and in fact, he did have a little bit of.
He did?
Yes, he did. And unlike most stars, actually was picking up his own luggage and signing autographs for people in a friendly way.
I don't want to hear anymore.
No, I've seen him in the supermarket.
Yeah,
He does that sort of thing.
he does. Yeah.
Do we have a deal?
Very startling cut.
Yeah. The film needs more of that human humorous quality altogether.
Yes, because actually with all of these films, it's the human story that works rather than.
Every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
What was that name?
Get my body back in a power plant.
It was Reagan. In fact, I was wondering whether there was a political commentary in calling him Reagan when he actually says, after 9 years of being in the Matrix, that even though he knows it's fake meat, he still thinks it's delicious, which was perhaps a political commentary there.
Definitely.
I mean, the first time through, I didn't feel anything going on between Carrie-Anne Moss and Keanu, really, but
No.
you can see it latently in her performance, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But in a totally sort of fatalistic way, too. You don't feel there's any great hope to it. Wonderful old phones all through the film in that way.
Yeah. And the combination of pay phones and phones like that and cell phones.
Yeah.
I would say all the way through Bill Pope's compositions, his sculptural lighting, it's just superb, and the lateral tracks are kind of a hallmark of the film. Beautifully, beautifully lit. And a very nice kind of rear projection quality to the scene.
It's actually, looking at it's much more interesting than what they're saying.
Much.
The obvious use all the time of the reflection of Neo versus just Neo himself, because you're dealing with alternate realities, is clearly one of the sort of visual hallmark of the thing.
Yeah.
What?
It's interesting, too, I think, that there are so many films now where, as we watch them on a television screen, as anyone will be watching this, we're actually watching only a part of the frame, because this movie making has gone back to this elongated, not quite a cinemascope frame, but it's gone back to this elongated, full-scap kind of frame, because it's just so beautiful. I mean, what people in the 1950s discovered,
So is this the same Oracle?
So the TV set now looks increasingly antiquated.
Yes. I think actually one of the striking things here is I remember being impressed was that they actually used the frame much better here than in so much of the stuff you see.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Never
Yeah.
wrong.
because people use it and then don't do anything with it, which actually is almost more aggravating.
Yeah. No, they're quite prepared to leave large areas of
Yes.
sort of neutral
Yes.
color and space.
Well, and in very cramped settings as well. I mean,
Yeah.
we noted at the beginning the work cubicles. I mean,
Yes.
just their scope work in there was
You bet.
Yeah.
striking here in an elevator. A lot of those scenes where they're just sitting around, like at that table
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the breakfast
Yeah.
scene,
Yeah.
they really do marvelously well with scenes that are not grandly conceived scenes.
Yeah.
The rabbits on the TV screen.
Mm.
What's that? What film is that? Giant Rabbit? What was that
Yeah, what
crazy
is
film?
it?
Yeah,
it was
I-
a crazy science fiction film, like an AIP film,
Right.
Giant Rabbits.
Yes. I can't remember what its name was.
This is where I was getting into the kind of
Yes.
pseudo-religious mumbo-jumbo. I was
Yeah.
just not going with it at this point.
I think bend the spoon, kid, and shut up.
I think this is Star Wars physics.
Yeah.
Star Wars as in SDR.
Yes. What's funny is that thing, not quite what you're expecting, is part of the, once again, sort of the social subtext of the film, where, it's the middle-aged African-American woman who becomes the embodiment of wisdom, which actually, once again, links to the whole racial, political ideas in the film.
Well, and of course, the utter mundaneness of the setting and
Yes.
her
Yeah.
activity here is the initial brilliant stroke.
Yes.
What is that music in the background, too? Is it a little bit of Dixieland, is it?
Yeah.
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 Now, this is a very bold concept to cast the Oracle like this.
Yes.
And very refreshing at this point in the film.
No, it's true.
Because you
and-
could not take another Morpheus.
Yes.
No, the Oracle does not wear sunglasses.
No. And actually speaks normally.
You know why Morpheus brought
Yeah,
you to see me.
totally. Yeah.
Well, and not hurt at all by the fact that she's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, she's terrific. And smokes.
No, is she the first person in the film who smokes, actually?
Honestly, I don't know.
I think she is.
I think she is, yeah.
I think she is, yes.
Of course, every small thing like that stands out in
Right.
a film like this.
No
Putting it
one
in
can
very
tell
human
you
terms for
well.
once.
No. Well,
It's swing music, not Dixieland.
So you can take the mumbo-jumbo and the kind of portentousness when it's delivered by someone like her.
Yeah.
It plays more easily in a home setting.
It is. It's more effective as well, because it keeps you in the story and makes it more enigmatic, actually.
And it also is the first sort of hint that this is a world where there are apartments and homes with kitchens with bead curtains
Yes.
and plastic countertops and things like that, such as we actually live in. The variations of green there, too, are just fabulous. I mean, they have a great eye for those things.
And how many?
Maybe that's Bill Pope, too. I don't know. But, it's just a terrific arrangement of greens.
Well, you wonder about the conception of the film in terms of green,
Yes.
because it's not normally the color you would think of.
No.
Probably designing a science fiction film and a futuristic film around. And they just do a terrific job with it.
Oh, it is, because you get that nice echo of Morpheus's necktie, for example, here.
Yep.
There's also the symbolic level, which I hadn't even thought about in terms of this film. But for instance, Vittorio Storaro composed a very, very elaborate construct for the meanings of different colors. And then in The Last Emperor, he would only introduce the color green, which the represented knowledge, when Peter O'Toole rode his bicycle into the film. And so that could be a whole subtext to the meaning of colors that we haven't even begun to absorb in this film.
Yes, well, because you do have life tones with her, with
That's
the green and the earth.
But of course, there's his green tie.
Yeah, of course, but he's linked to her. Because,
But the cookies are still cookie color.
Yes.
They're not green.
Well, with the suggestion that as one of the rare pieces of actual domesticity you see in the entire film, that this is the harboring place of the Oracle.
And almost a sort of a shot from on the waterfront kind of thing here. It's got that real urban backyard scruffy feeling.
There's small elements of cool here. I mean, that's the only American car where the doors open that way from the hinges on opposite ends. I mean, the detail is great.
Yeah. Watch out for deja vu.
Yes.
What is it?
Very conventional music here, I think.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah. Interesting to sort of think of this film with maybe a Philip Glass-like score on it.
Yes.
Well, because they actually are very careful about sound. It's only
the soundtrack is excellent.
It's excellent. It's just the music that's drab or generic.
There's something unfailingly powerful, I think, in movie scenes that are sort of about the underground and the resistance, and when the stormtroopers come in, it's as if that whole idea of the Nazis are at the door has become something in our dream that will never go away, and it works in all circumstances, I think.
And it kind of links to one's dream life again, with the notion of somehow you're beleaguered and being burst in on.
Yeah.
In your because psychologically, your most private thing is being invaded here.
Yeah.
It's very smart to have her in white there.
Good.
Yeah.
They always give you something in the corner of a frame to have something interesting going on. If it's just.
But again, the very mundane setting adds so much here.
And of course, the antecedents to Nazis and World War II films and beyond is emphasized by the conventional weaponry. I mean, this is not a science fiction film where they've chosen to use laser guns or zap ray guns or anything like that.
Yeah.
And by the helmets, too.
Yeah. Yes, the helmets, I think, are important.
It's interesting. One wonders whether this in any way, some of this affected the conception of the Department of Pre-Crime in Minority Report. Because aren't they wearing those weird helmets?
I think Minority Report certainly derived from some of these.
Because Spielberg would know what works, and he knew that this kind of stuff worked.
Yeah. The arms coming through the wall there, there's an interesting bit of Polanski,
as you say, Repulsion.
Yeah.
What was the first film to have bullet holes shooting through with getting the light?
Gosh. Well, the first time I can remember really spectacular, do you remember where they blow the barn in Black Sunday?
Yeah.
You remember? Where Bruce Dern rehearses the bomb, and that barn is suddenly totally perforated construction.
Right.
But I'm sure it had been done before then.
I'm sure it had. I'm just wondering. There's always a weird. I mean, this will seem bizarre, but a strange resonance. If you think of the Garry Kasparov battle against the big blue computer, where the whole idea is, in this film, is Kasparov's problem was he got spooked by the thought that the computer was thinking in a way he couldn't, and therefore his own mind weakened, even though he's probably smarter than the computer. Here, when you're fighting when you're fighting Smith, you actually have to keep your own faith in what you're doing, because he never falters, which I think is a kind of a fascinating thing.
No, and it increases the power of the character of Smith, that he is actually physically less prepossessing than some of the others, and is dressed in a conventional suit, and yet he has greater physical powers than the others.
Because he's completely steady, unrattleable. Everybody else has to deal with frail humanity.
And if you'd had a more conventional action adventure actor playing this part. I mean, just imagine this with Tom Cruise, for instance. I mean, it would have been, I think, less interesting a lot because he would have had somehow a certainty. Tom Cruise always has this certainty about his own abilities and what he's going to, he will prevail. And Keanu, again, is more of a blank, and I think is more effective in a film like this.
I think no matter who in the world does that shot of those things coming out, it always looks cheesy to me. And
it really hasn't changed that much since Flash Gordon.
No, it really hasn't.
No.
And
70 years ago.
And I think that's why, as we're going to see shortly, when we get bullets you can see, they add a lot. Because that is something new, you know.
Yes. Guess you've never seen any of my other movies.
But you feel that he is someone the Oracle would know that's in the apartment down the hall. And again, the film needs more people like these ones, I think.
Yes.
Rather than these very obedient, script-serving figures. A little more originality would have helped in them.
You know, rather uninspired, wouldn't you say, that the payoff to that sequence?
Seen it before.
Yeah.
Every week of your life.
Yeah, and the build-up needs a bigger, better payoff. There's no question.
It does.
Yeah. It needs something like a miracle, and really a film of this sort, I think, needs to have within its power something miraculous.
It does, and I think the kind of, I don't know when it actually started, but the obligatory sense of like someone always saying something like, "Take this, you piece of shit," is just so tiresome. For a film that actually has ambitions that go far beyond the banality of that.
Yeah.
When it's moments like that, when the gap between the visual sophistication of the film and the various levels of the conception and the screenwriting really become more noticeable.
You bet.
But then you can forget about it right away because you have a strikingly
Look at it.
set up scene here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's another sort of Nazi thing in a way, I suppose, but the element of torches coming in here, and I find very interesting and terribly disturbing how in popular entertainment torture has been building. I don't know if you're devotees of 24, but 24 was using torture and really not even commenting on it at all, long before the prison in Iraq came through. But that notion that we've been doing it all along, I think it's been there as a subtext in films for a few years. And there's something about watching films, I think, that makes torture a little easier. There was a whole experiment in Stanford years ago, decades ago indeed, where psychology students would start torturing fellow students because they were watching them on camera. And, this is a huge issue, and no way we can deal with it thoroughly here, but I do think in films like this where you see torture scenes come in, the resonance is very disturbing.
But you mean that they could do the torture because they were watching it through an intermediary?
Absolutely. These people were watching
cameras?
associates on film, and they would actually press the button to increase the shock or something like that.
Rather than having to face them
That's
personally.
That's right.
It makes a huge difference, of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the whole notion, and this film is only one of thousands that touch upon it, of the way in which films can inflict vast damage on their characters, and yet pain is not a quality that the cinema deals in very well. So you begin to separate them.
And a small one of thousands of instances of how there can be gradual desensitization, desensitivity to certain activities when you see it on screen, whether it be television or cinema.
That I would have to
which I guess again raises another Kubrick reference of Clockwork Orange.
Very much, yeah.
Which you can't help but think about during those scenes where they're strapped down looking at things or thinking about other realms of reality.
Yeah.
I have to.
What?
Come again.
Say that again.
Yes.
I know that's.
See, it's where simultaneously intrigued and put off. And how far are you supposed to take this as a Christ analogy? I mean, that's
I think you
it's
are.
pushed at moments, and then at other times it's completely
But I think you are.
back. And of course, he's the reluctant savior,
Right.
Yeah.
and he's just a man. Jesus Christ Superstar lyric, as I recall. And maybe the asexuality plays into that here.
That
Also, of course, that's
she's
violated later on.
Yeah.
It's actually funny in watching a film like this, even a huge, influential film, like how many scenes are almost by necessity completely banal, like that one, where they're simply talking back and forth, and the whole point is simply to get to the point where you actually leave and do the thing that everybody in the theater knows they're going to do.
No, get back to the setup. Yeah,
Yes.
these two together. Yeah.
Revelation, the surrounding.
Why do I think he's heard William F. Buckley lately?
Yes.
Now, we can't forget this is also a Joel Silver production.
Yes, yes. Joel Silver
the-
has done something like this, I think.
Artillery section.
Yes.
Leave me with
Although this is actually they're setting up one of the coolest things in the movie.
Yeah.
One of the great villains, I think, here, and like all great villains on screen, so compelling that you begin to listen very carefully to what he's saying.
Yes.
And wonder if you don't
Yes.
agree with some of
Yes.
Well, they do one of the crucial things in all films like this: have a great villain, a great bad guy. And
Yes.
he is more compelling in the way he speaks and philosophically than anyone else in it.
Yes.
More coherent as well.
Yeah. Times like this, it's nearly a black and white film, isn't it? Just it's so severe.
Yes. I think the term "holy shit" should be banned from every film till the end of time.
Yes.
When you see a scene like this, everything else sort of gets washed away, and you're just mesmerized by the every shot. It's so dense.
Yeah.
And you wonder somehow how many times did they have to replace the marble and do it over
yes.
again and
Can you
over
imagine
again. It's
the
just
tedium of
extraordinary.
doing so?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then doing this
All
with
those
the various speed
bags,
levels.
bags of fragments they had and everything, yeah. But also, you do feel here the video game to come.
Yes.
I mean, this is exactly the kind of combat games that our kids are playing hours on end. The music here is absolutely banal, isn't
Right
it?
off a video game. It's,
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
couldn't be more simple and unimaginative.
I don't
Great.
know why, but at that moment I think of Pritzi's Honor. Where they've killed people and they get in the elevator. It's just an image.
One moment of vulnerability for Smith.
Yeah.
Yep.
The suitcase with the magical thing in it. How far does that go back in movies? To the box and Kiss Me Deadly.
I think.
Yeah.
I think the fireball thing is pretty much done in the history of cinema too. I mean, we'll see it a million more times. But
Yeah.
is anyone still excited by that stuff? I mean, this is actually the nicer payoff.
Much better. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's so it's become such a cliche, and yet obviously there's a whole band of people earning their living by setting off fires like this
Yes.
in films.
All right, and here's
this
something
is
new.
this is great.
This is good. Yeah.
Dazzling. Yeah. This is wonderful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, because his postures,
So elegant.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is also extreme violence as fashion layout.
yeah.
Can't get away from that.
Well, again, it's that separation, isn't it? I mean, I'm quite certain that kids have seen this film and come away and in their little games have said, "Dodge this." It's a great line, but it's a bit frightening.
What is, since you mentioned Apocalypse Now, it's interesting that, the first time I ever remember seeing Lawrence Fishburne
Oh yeah.
is in Apocalypse Now, slaughtering the people in the sampan.
Yes.
Where murdering people has a very different significance than it does here.
And there's the helicopter.
Yes.
Of course, the addition of the water gives it a whole
Yeah.
great texture to it.
Yeah, but it's interesting the way they do fetishize every, all the implements of murder in one way or another.
Yeah.
They're taken out of boxes. They fall gloriously from the sky.
Also, I mean, what do you think the slow motion fall of spent cartridge cases? What does that mean psychologically? It's far too potent just to be what it is. It's got something it must have something sexual, but I feel I don't want to know what it is.
Yes, no, it's true. Because it's not essential to the scene in any
Not really,
narrative
no,
way.
not at all, no. Although it does give you the sound, which is very valuable. Scenes with when someone holds a person against gravity, I think, also should be banned for 10 years.
Yes, I think so. Once again, we're caught with the irreducible fact that you can't make every bit of an action sequence interesting.
No.
So you actually have the wonderful water stuff. Here you think, I'm sure I've seen a James Cameron film.
Oh, the True Lies has
yes,
this.
exactly.
Yeah.
That has that.
Yeah.
But that's right. You say you can't. Every scene can't be new, but there's so many in the same film that are.
Yes, no, I wouldn't fault this one for lack of new ones. I'm just saying, nevertheless, even guys who are trying to make it completely new.
And also, they still have got the sense of that shot of her forearm, the muscles in her arm, with the leather and the glove. They see details like that that really I don't think other people had seen. The liquefaction of solid things that you got in that moment of impact, that's another thing that goes back to Cocteau too, I think, who would show you something that seemed to be a hard surface, and it was actually a frozen pool or something like that.
And is in fact much more interesting at every level than just the flying glass that we do associate with Joel Silver.
Yeah, yes.
Still, although you have to say it's an action scene worthy of the climax, the message of the scene. It's a great action scene.
It is it's a great action scene. Also, I think by the time we get to the next two films, it will seem comparatively austere.
Yes, agreed.
Which adds another level of self-consciousness to it. Of course, this film is riddled with references and elements from so many works of cinema and philosophy, religion, and so on and so forth. But then with the second two films, we'll get into the idea of the self-consciousness of your own cool.
Yes.
And your own hipness and your own references, which have been received in a certain way, which you didn't know the first time around.
No, it's a bit early maybe for us to say this, but I have the feeling that if only the first film had been made, I think it would now be held in very high esteem. And we're talking here as critics who have to say that I think the franchising of something that succeeds, which is automatic in cinema now, and I suppose has been automatic always, in so many cases starts to de-energize what it was that was special.
It's interesting to have the Terminator here be, the guy who always keeps turning up as nemesis, be the funniest guy in the movie, and
just our clothes will fight for us then.
Yes. But it's interesting here how the fighting and the menace is often human scale. So it's just the two guys together. And at this point, we don't know really what will kill who or how they die. Yeah. And so therefore, there actually is a sense of menace and danger. I mean, we obviously suspect that Keanu Reeves isn't going to die.
Although, again, if there had been only one film, it might have ended very differently.
Yes.
That little detail of his broken dark glass was fabulous, wasn't it, too, early? And the idea of this abandoned subway station is exactly that kind of ordinariness that the film brings in so often.
Although, one of the things that's always striking in this kind of film is how depopulated the world often seems.
Yes.
So the one scene where they're walking along the street with the one with the red dress is just like there are a zillion people, and I think now we're in the same city. Except, I would have thought in a normal city people would have noticed that falling helicopter.
Yeah. There are actually very, very few extras in this.
The subway train thing is picked up again in the third one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And one of the best scenes in the later films is the subway scene.
Yeah, so I imagine it's a deliberate echo. It's somehow, liking subway things. And they call me Mr. Tibbs.
Empty train, was it?
I think it was. It's no, it's not.
Now it's got people in it. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
And it's actually much better when you are in the world.
Wabash
and Lake are in Chicago.
That is Chicago, yeah.
For big action film, this has more labyrinths and confined spaces. There's always a sense of great compression and constriction in the settings.
Absolutely, and I think time and again they're at their best in that sort of place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can remember the apartment in Bound, those interior spaces being very suggestive, and wires going through the walls and that kind of thing.
I don't even feel like I know what's going on here. Can't we just cut back to the chase?
No. In fact, you can see in that
that's where the series is going.
Yes, it's where the series is going.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's no one seeing that would think, oh, that's the really,
what I want to see.
Yeah, that's the cool part of the Matrix.
No.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's where it really goes off for me. I just pull out of that because that's a scene out of another film, really. Even though obviously it's part of what they're getting at, but it's not what you're interested in watching.
No. And those things flying through are a little reminiscent of like the spying spiders in Minority Report that run around, except that somehow those pay off effectively.
Because they're so small and so intimate.
They're so small and so intimate, and there's actually some drama built. Are they going to find him?
And when they go beneath the water of his bath, if you remember, that's very frightening.
Yes.
But this means nothing to me here. I don't want to be watching this.
Yes. Perhaps they'll edit it out of the DVD. What do you think? The critics have spoken. Actually, I think I propose that they should start releasing critics' cuts of films.
There you go. Still at this point, we don't know how can you dispose of Agent Smith, because he did get clobbered by the subway train. He comes right out of there.
That's right.
What does it take? I mean, we still don't really know the terms of what's possible or how you could ultimately triumph against him.
Yes. But I think that what's effective in this film is that you actually believe that it will be revealed somehow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I'm prepared to not know if I think they're going to actually tell me. Later on I'm not sure they will tell me, which is the difficult thing. Well, after all, they're meaningful time together and deep conversations. And actually what's curious is that when I saw the film when it first came out, the teenagers were snorting at that point.
Oh yeah.
Even by teenage standards, you don't fall in love with people that quickly or that unconvincingly.
Did your son have anything to say about this part?
Yeah.
David?
He was totally forgetful of this part when we were talking about the film later, yeah.
No,
I mean, love scenes and love relationships in films give him the willies at the moment. He doesn't like them at all.
No.
On the other hand, when you are 10 or 12 or 13, the mushy parts in these kind of films aren't nearly what they were back in the 50s and the 60s. You had to endure much, much, much more very stilted, silly scenes like that. So they get them over with pretty quickly here.
Yeah.
Just think how many flying CGI objects we've seen, since then. This is...
Yeah. But here,
that's great.
It's fabulous.
Oh, no, it was even the flying ship was fabulous the first time you saw it.
Yeah. Now, this is religious, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But he's still beautifully bewildered.
Yes.
Well, although he accepted it. He said he was the one earlier.
Yeah. Oh, look at this. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's no problem.
One hand behind my back.
Yeah. Subverting the system from within.
He's finally home. He knows it. All right, now, what concretely happened there? Do you know? What did that represent in terms of the Matrix?
Well, wasn't the machine world bursting into the reality of the thing? Those are the emissaries of the machine world.
Yeah. So, but it was all breaking down, or just these? What does that represent of the whole system?
Well, I think it's going after the intruders into the system, isn't it? Or the actually evil part of the system. My failure to explain this convincingly.
Tells us something.
Yes, given the fact that people are talking all the time in the movie in exposition.
Yeah.
Possible.
And here's the place where you could imagine this is the political allegory somehow.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think if the whole series ends here, you've got nearly a masterpiece.
Despite what we've said.
Yeah, I mean, but you've got a hell of a film.
Yep.
And a film that would stand alone as having done something and introduced a vision that you couldn't shrug off.
And it's complete.
I think it is. That's it. I think it could be shorter.
Yeah, it could be short.
Yeah. There's some things we've picked on that we might take out, but it's a very good film, I think.
Yeah. No,
and it, in terms of its originality and novelty of impact, it's more than just a very good film. It was a phenomenon.
Oh, it was. It was in some ways, I probably wrote this, or maybe quoting myself, but actually almost every movie around it, and for like in a year before, a year after, suddenly looked old-fashioned.
Yeah.
That's true. It set a new standard. And the funny thing, it was completely unanticipated at the time. It came out in March of that year. No one really knew what they were. I don't even.
Movie opens.
No, and I don't know whether anyone had any idea what kind of phenomenon it could be.
Yes. Well, wasn't there a funny article, I think, in the LA Times talking about how the Warner Brothers executives thought it was impossible to understand, and we're just baffled by it.
Well, again, I think it's an age thing. It's a literal mindedness aspect, which is a problem I have with some of it. I thought that I was taking it very much on a comprehensibility level of not really thinking all those references came together in any meaningful way. But you can't deny that it's really, really strong and cool, and so it gives you something that you haven't seen before, which is one of the elemental aspects of what the cinema is about now. Yeah, absolutely. So, but it was the fact that it was unanticipated. No, it wasn't perceived in advance as an event.
No.
And so it really was a sort of thought. Well, you didn't know what the Wachowski brothers would be capable of after Bound, and maybe you perceived it more as a Joel Silver film with an iffy leading man. You didn't know that he customarily identified with really strong films. So I think the surprise element was really strong on this film.
Yeah.
And it actually, in narrative terms, I'm content with Neo discovering he's the one. That somehow the whole character arc is developed in terms of the part that would interest me, and that now we get in with the next films into the mythology, which I think is kind of groanful.
Yeah, it really hangs on him, and you have to say that while Reeves was, in some quarters certainly laughed at, treated very lightly as an actor in those days, this is a huge film, and he holds it together. He holds it in place, and I don't think he becomes monotonous at all.
No.